Moving to the offensive line, the tackle position. The tackle position is always one that teams are looking to upgrade, specifically with veterans. Always highly priced, always sought out for, always being paid a lot of money. So let's take a look at the top 10 tackles this year in free agency. So starting off with by far the best, Trent Williams, who Trent Williams is maybe the best tackle in the NFL, period. He just came back to football last year and dominated. He might end up back in San Francisco because he likes it there. He performed well there. But anyone that gets him, he's going to be an all-pro caliber tackle. That's how good he is. Taylor Moton is a really underrated player. I think he's a really good right tackle. He's good in pass protection, solid in the run game. He's going to be a high-end starter. You have Darrell Williams, who can play a little bit of tackle, a little bit of guard. I prefer him at right tackle, where he was a former second-team All-Pro of Carolina and a very good player this year for Buffalo. Darrell Williams would be like Taylor Moton, like a solid, not even just solid, he would be good starting right tackle. Villanueva, his years are probably behind him. He probably has 1 year left at the very most. I don't even know if he's going to retire or not. At least I haven't heard anything now, but he could be a guy that starts for 1 year. Maybe he's like a bridge tackle, or he goes to a contending team that needs protection. Russell Okung. Russell Okung's kind of the same thing as Villanueva, although I think Villanueva is significantly better. Russell Okung, I would be a little bit worried about because he just feels like a guy that hasn't played that well recently, but has a big name that everybody kind of knows. So that really speaks to maybe overpaid. Number 6, Banner. Banner is underrated. Didn't get the chance to play this year much, but I think he'll end up in Pittsburgh, and he'll probably start for Pittsburgh, and I think he'll play pretty well in Pittsburgh. So that tells you what I think of him. Number 7, Illuminor. Started mostly at tackle for New England this year as their right tackle, with Marcus Cannon being out for the year with the COVID situation. He can play a little guard, a little tackle, but he actually really impressed me. Very solid player, versatility, and doesn't make a lot of mistakes. He's like a starting caliber right tackle or guard. Brunskill, I think his home is as a tackle. He's played guard, center, and tackle, so it really depends where you want him, but I value those type of offensive linemen because he can start at any spot and be pretty good at any spot. But I think he's best at tackle because when he filled in at tackle last year, he was actually a really, really good player for San Francisco. You have Beachum, who is very experienced as a tackle. He's a little bit older, but in a pinch, he can start for you. Basically, if you need him, maybe you sign him as your swing tackle, and he could be that guy on a good team. DeMar Dotson is similar. You know, a guy that played in Tampa for a lot of years, was actually like a Pro Bowl caliber tackle for a couple of years there. Last year played decent. He's older. He's like his mid-30s. But if you need a starter on a team or a swing tackle, a guy that can play and start in a pinch, he's that same guy as Beachum. So those final two guys are like veterans that you could sign off the street. Illuminor and Brunskill are like these hybrid, versatile tackles that can play like everywhere. Banner is like a solid starter. Okung is like, can start, but is he more name recognition? Darrell Williams and Taylor Moton are like really good, like 3 or 4 year starters. Trent Williams is the best player by a mile, and he's an all-pro. So those are the tackles. Really interesting position. The guard position, a little bit less interesting. There are a couple big names. Oh, I actually forgot. Let's take a look at the undervalued and the buyer beware. My bad. So let's take a look at that for the tackle position. The undervalued, Cam Robinson. I have Cam Robinson here. He's not in my top 10, but I have him here because, yes, he hasn't played very well as a Jag, but I think a lot of that has to do because he's a Jag. The Jags just aren't good. I think Cam Robinson is like one of those reclamation projects at tackle where if he goes to a better system, a better fit, he could actually like regain his form as a prospect and like be like a starting pretty good player. So that's why I have him as undervalued, because I think he was a promising prospect who went to a bad team and was never really able to get it going. Denzel Good is another guy that's a lot like Illuminor or Brunskill, can play guard or tackle, can start probably in the league if need be, but he's more of a swing guy. I have Brunskill here because I think he's undervalued because a lot of people will look at his production as a guard and say, oh, he's not that good. But as a tackle, he's actually a much better player. Buyer beware Russell Okung because of his age, because of his name value, because basically he's one of those few tackles that everybody kind of knows, but he's not really as good as he used to be. And Jason Peters, because yes, he's a Hall of Famer, one of the best tackles I've ever seen, but he's old as dirt. He's almost 40. And I don't think he's going to play anywhere but Philadelphia, really, unless one of these contenders call. And I don't think he's really that good anymore, guys. So that's why I have him as a buyer beware. Now let's get to the guard position. Guard position, we have a couple big-time players and then a lot of maybe starters, maybe high-end backup guys. That's the way I look at the guard position this year in free agency. Let's take a look at my top 10 guards. So let's start off with Brandon Scherf, who is an all-pro this year. Has been an all-pro, Pro Bowl level guard for the last 3, 4, 5 years for Washington, but not a lot of people know who he is because he plays for Washington. But very good player, will go for a lot of money, and he is worth it. He is very good as a run blocker specifically, but also very solid as a pass blocker. Joe Thuney is a better pass blocker than run blocker, but he is an excellent player. Joe Thuney is versatile as well. He is tough as nails. He's experienced. He's rarely missed any games. I think they're about the same age. Scherf just played better recently on a worse line, so I give him the edge, but Joe Thuney is just as good, if not better sometimes. And those two guys are clearly the best out of anybody on this list. And both will go for a significant amount of money because both are very good. Matt Filer, I believe is how you pronounce his last name, but he's a guy from Pittsburgh who played tackle, played guard, can kind of play both spots. I like that versatility. He's been pretty good at both spots and was pretty good this year. He's more of a pass blocker, which I do value more than run blocking. So that's why he's also a little bit higher on this list. But yeah, he's good. He's solid starter in this league. Lane Taylor, kind of the same thing. Didn't really play this year, was hurt, but solid starter in the league and has been good with Green Bay when called upon. J.R. Sweezy is actually, I think, underrated. I think he's always been kind of underrated. He's not an analytical darling or anything, but I really like him because he's powerful, he's explosive, he's strong. He can really give you an edge. I think he brings that toughness and that physicality. He kind of how would I explain this? He's like a road grader. He's downhill, beat you up, run you over kind of guard. He's not technically the most sound, but in a situation where he could thrive, he's really good. Feliciano is more of a pass blocker. He's more of a finesse guy than a Sweezy. He was okay for Buffalo. He's a starting caliber player, but not an excellent starter. DJ Fluker played tackle this year, but we know him as a guard. He could play both, though. Speaks to his versatility. He's a big boy. He's closer to a Sweezy, and he's a downhill run blocker. Any situation where he can be that, he's good. Easton is okay. He's got solid versatility. I'm a little concerned because, New Orleans cut him, and he was the third guard on that team, and he didn't play a lot, and there's not really a lot to go off of. But he's a solid player when he's filled in and been pretty good. More of, I would say, a pass blocker than anything. Mike Iupati has been one of the, veteran guards of this league for 10 plus years, but still can play fairly well and still can start, but I don't think he's a starter that I'd want. Ibushi is underrated, I would say. Not a lot of people know who he is. He's from Detroit. Didn't play a lot of snaps, but played enough to see that he's pretty good, and I think deserves a starting caliber contract, and I think is a starting caliber guard. But he would probably be higher on the list if he was a little bit more proven, but that's why I have him at number 10. So those are my rankings. Let's look at the undervalued and the buyer beware. So Ibushi, I put here because I think he's a guy that we don't have a lot of tape of him, but when he's played well. John Miller is a guy from Carolina that was pretty solid starter. I don't know if he's much better than that, but he's young, so I think he's undervalued. Alex Redmond from Cincinnati played fairly well, fairly graded well from PFF, like around 40 something. And considering it's the Cincinnati offensive line, which sucks, and he played pretty well there, that's not bad. You could do worse than that. I think he's like maybe a third guard on a lot of teams, but I think he could be better on a better team and a better offensive line. So that's why I have him as undervalued. Buyer beware Mike Iupati, who I just think he's old, and I saw some bad moments from him this year, so I wouldn't really be willing to invest unless I was Seattle for another year. Andrew Wiley, who got his absolute butt kicked by everybody on Tampa Bay, and I just think he kind of sucks. I just gonna be Patrick Mahomes, like running away from everybody, made him look better than he is, in my opinion. So that is the guard position, guys. The center position. So centers, we have actually 3 really good starting caliber centers, and then we have a few pretty good players as well, and about like 5 to 7 starters. So that's not bad. If you're a team looking for a starter, definitely worth investing at center. So let's take a look at the center top 10. Corey Linsley, who you could argue is the best center in football. I think this year he was, in fact, and probably ends up back in Green Bay, but he is interesting. I think he might be overpaid because I don't know if centers are necessarily worth like that much, like as much money as a tackle or even a guard. But hey, he's really good, so maybe he is. I don't know. Depends how you feel about centers. David Andrews, who I love this guy. I mean, David Andrews is whoever signs him. If it's New England, which probably will be, but if it's not New England, he's just a phenomenal player to have. He's a great leader. He is extremely intelligent. Good in both areas of the game, run game, pass game. Just, he's a top 5 center when he's at his peak. He wasn't as good this year, but I think he has plenty of years ahead of him where he'll be a very good player. Alex Mack is a Hall of Fame center, but he's old and he's regressed, and I think could go to a contender. Maybe he stays with Atlanta for another year or two, but it's probably only another year or two for Alex Mack. Austin Reeder, I think, is underrated for Kansas City. Good pass blocker, which I value, and I think could be a decent starter for a lot of teams. Ted Karras is like a worse version of David Andrews. Probably more of a hard-nosed, tougher kind of guy. You know, he's more of a grinder. He's not the most talented, but like he gives you that edge and that just physical nature to the center position, which isn't a bad thing. Pocic is a solid, same kind of thing as Ted Karras. He's not like one of the more talented, gifted centers, but he's like edgy and physical, and teams that run the ball a lot, probably in power schemes, will be good with him. Austin Blythe is more of a zone blocker. He's been good in LA, but I am concerned that he might not be as good elsewhere. That's why he ranks a little bit lower. Ben Garland, same kind of thing. Now, Ben Garland played for San Francisco, and Ben Garland played center, played guard, and he's been good when he's played, but he's been hurt recently. He didn't play this year as much, and he's in an offense just like Blythe, where both of these guys are in zone schemes where I feel like it's easier to play in. I think it's easier, more conducive to offensive line, and the coaches kind of protect them more. So that's why I have them a little bit lower. I'm just not as certain about them overall as the guys that are ahead of them, even though, you know, they might be graded higher, but that's not the only thing that I really look at when I'm looking at offensive linemen. And then you have a couple more players that are really interesting. You know, Shatley, Skura, I think kind of sucked, you know, considering he's in a really good spot for Baltimore. If a team just signs him because he's from Baltimore, I hope not, but like, I don't know. I think Baltimore needs an upgrade at that spot. And then Shatley as well. Those are my final of the 10 centers. But I really look at like 8 starting caliber guys, and then the rest are like high-end backups kind of thing. That's the way I look at it. So my undervalued and my buyer beware centers. So David Andrews, I think he's undervalued because I think he's coming off a season where he didn't play quite as well as he can. Like, he was good, don't get me wrong, but he wasn't like the best he can be. That's why I think he's undervalued, because he's being paid at a time that's not coming off of his peak of play. Ben Garland could be undervalued because of his versatility, because of his success when he has played, but there are those question marks. Austin Reeder, I think, is undervalued because I think people are going to look at him as a plug-and-play center, but I think actually if he ends up going elsewhere, people will be impressed with how good he is. Buyer beware, I'd say Alex Mack, just because he's old and he could be regressing, and you never want to pay a lot of money to a big-name center who is regressing. Austin Blythe, just because he's in a Sean McVay offensive line, and those guys aren't as good, I think, as the system makes them look. But that's just my opinion. You can disagree if you like. So those are my free agent centers.